Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Friday, February the 18th, and today I am talking with what might be a familiar face to some of you, especially those of you in Birmingham. And today I'm joined by Barnett Wright. Now, he is the Birmingham Times executive editor. Barnett has been with the Birmingham Times since 2016 and has also been just a force in the Birmingham area and in the media world for quite a while. So, Barnett, thank you for joining me here today. I've got a whole long list of things I want to talk to you about. I won't keep you all day, even though I would like to. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the Birmingham Times. Now, we know it is Black History Month, and we know that the Birmingham Times was founded to give the Black community a greater voice during the civil rights struggle in the 60s. So, tell me a little bit about that mission, and if that mission is still the mission of the Birmingham Times today.
First of all, good morning. Ivan, it's always great to see you. We were colleagues, however, briefly, but it's always been a pleasure working with you, and it's a pleasure to be here to talk to you this morning. So thank you for having
You
me.
are now.
The Birmingham Times was founded by Dr. Jesse J. Lewis in 1963. And the amazing thing about that is the paper is still around, and so is he. He turned 97 years old in January, and he's still working. He's still golfing. He still comes to the office every day. I try to get as much wisdom from him as possible. So he founded the newspaper with the mission of covering the African American community at that particular time, because it's widely known that the Birmingham News at that time just didn't cover the African American community. So he provided some news. Dr. Lewis covered news through the Birmingham Times. It was also the Birmingham World. And we have evolved now. I know we can talk about some of this, but we still have a primary focus on the African American community, Ivan, but we've expanded to cover the wider community. For example, just this week we have a cover. I don't know if you can see this or not. This is this week's cover where we talked about, and we can come back to this later on, talk about regional cooperation, right? So we look at those issues that have an impact on the African American community, regardless of where it comes from: City Hall, county courthouse, state lawmakers. And this is a whole community that has helped, not only move the African American community forward, but the entire community. And there's a long way to go. There's steps to go, but this is a better community now. And we focus on the good that is in the community, whether it's the white community, Black community, the communities together. So we have evolved. We still have the focus on African American community, but we've evolved to a wider audience now.
Well, and it would probably be hard pressed to find an issue in Birmingham that in some way, shape, or form does not affect the African American community.
And that's a great point. So if you're talking about roads, right? Everybody drives on roads. If you talk about a food desert, right? So everybody faces that at some point in time. We talk about economic development. Okay, look at what the stadium can do for everybody, especially those surrounding neighborhoods, largely African American on the north side. Okay, so how does the stadium, which is a regional draw now, how does it impact or affect those communities near the stadium? So yes, it's kind of hard to look at one particular issue that affects one particular community. So we try to cover them as holistically as possible.
And I'm sure that you have kind of grown too with your audience. You talk about growing in that story, growing in the planning of your stories and your coverage here. But I'm sure your audience and your readers have grown too, not just from the African American community, but to Birmingham as a whole.
Absolutely. So we try to cover the city council meetings, things that are happening there that has an impact on everybody. And Ivana, we talk about this. So what has been the biggest story over the past year and a half, 2 years? COVID, right? COVID just doesn't impact one segment. We all had to deal with COVID-19. We all had to deal with the coronavirus. We all had to deal with the variants, right? So we just couldn't cover it from a one community perspective. We had to look at all of it, all the entire communities. Although I would say that many African Americans had a tougher time because they had some pre-existing conditions going into COVID. Some of that was exacerbated. So we spent a lot of time talking to the doctors at UAB, talking to the doctors at some of the other medical centers, medical facilities on the impact that the COVID-19, that the variants had on African American community. Yes, it was holistic, but it did have probably a more detrimental, adverse impact on Blacks.
Well, I mean, I know that we could all sit here and say that we wish that COVID-19 didn't affect everyone, right? We all wish it affects somebody else and not us. But like you said, it was unfortunately something that affected everybody. And some people got hit worse than others. That seems to be kind of the story of life, right? Sometimes the people who get hit the worst by everything get hit the worst by everything. That is unfortunately the world that we've seen. Now, Barnett, something that I also think is interesting about the Birmingham Times is you've had this mission again since the founding in the 60s. You've explained how that has kind of broadened a little bit. But then we look at February, Black History Month. Do you think at a time in February, at a time where we are in the world and in Black History Month, it is important to have a newspaper that wants to primarily serve African Americans and wants to get out their stories into the world?
I do. And I think it's also a time to refocus on some of the stories and the issues and also the publications, right, that we have in our communities. We try to, we look at Black history as almost every week, right? We try to tell those stories as they come, stories that are historic in nature. Let me give you one example. Ashley Jones, okay, the poet, she was the first Black poet laureate in the state of Alabama, which is huge. Okay, so that happened last summer, last fall. We put her on the cover because it was history, right? So that's not a story that we'll wait for February to tell. Also, we had a cover story on Odessa Woolfolk. Odessa Woolfolk is an absolute giant, and I think our cover headline was "Our Living Legend." So we told her story from a historical perspective. But to get back to your question, absolutely. So we did was we went back for Black History Month, our first edition, and we had some historic photographs, Ivana. These are our pictures that took place back in 1965, and we saw things that we've never saw before. And I wrote a book about Birmingham, 1963, talked about it. Doing the research for this, I found stories or that we never had before, and we wouldn't have done it if not for Black History Month. This picture here is of Little Korea. Okay, there was a community in Birmingham that was so bad that it got the name Little Korea because it was destructive or because of the living conditions, I should say. The living conditions were just that bad for people at that particular time. So if not for Black History Month, we wouldn't have told that story. But we would have told that story and shared it with our readers. So here's another picture. There's one more I want to show. Here's a young lady here who she lived in a tent. That's how adverse the conditions were for some Blacks in the mid 60s, where the fact that she lived in a tent, and the cut line on that story said, "Woman standing at the entrance of a tent where her family was living in Lowndes County." Now, Ivana, when I saw that, okay, you live in a tent. So what happens if it's nights like last night or mornings like we had this morning when it's freezing cold outside? How do you stay warm in a tent? Or let's reverse that, those hot, sticky summer nights, okay, that we have in Alabama. And it says with her family. Was it her mom? Was it her dad? Was it her children? Was it her siblings? See, we don't know that. But Black history is a time where we can go and do these kind of stories. We really ought to be doing it. Stories like this, probably more often. But I think you bring up a good point. The importance of Black History Month is a time for us to do this kind of research. And what this told me is we need to do this more often.
That's what I was going to ask. Do you see this, and do you see the reporting that you and your colleagues and just media in general and the state put on Black History Month and say, look, why aren't we doing this the other 11 months out of the year?
Yeah, I think so. But you know what? I'm going to have to accept responsibility for what we do. I can't hold anybody else responsible for that. If I'm gonna talk the talk, I have to walk the walk. I think we have to do it. Okay, and hopefully lead by example. Like I said, we do it as Black history develops, as almost breaking news stories. But I think you're right. I think you have a good point that we need to put an emphasis on these kinds of stories year round. We haven't done that. We haven't done enough of that, and we need to look at that.
You talk about being a leader, Barnett. I've known you for 7 years, and you've been a leader
Well,
throughout those entire 7 years. And something that you are really good about, I'll brag on you a minute because you won't do it for yourself, but you are incredible at mentoring young journalists. I've seen that firsthand. I've seen it from the people that you have on your staff. You do an amazing job there. What is your main message? If you had to give a 1 or 2 sentence message to young journalists in coming up in a world that we live in now, covering the world we live in now, whether it's for the Birmingham Times, for AL.com, for the New York Times, what would you say?
There are a lot of great examples around us. Follow the examples. You look at what John Archibald's doing with Brookside. Okay, that's a master class in journalism. Okay, look at how he's bulldogging that story. Right. Look at those individuals in your community who are doing great journalism. Okay, Carol Robinson is a legendary police reporter. Okay, and Carol Robinson just doesn't do crime. Okay, Carol Robinson does follow-up stories with the families. She does great interviews, as you know, with the families. Kyle Whitmire is doing some great stuff. I think a State of Denial, I believe, is something he's working on. He's doing those kind of stories. So you can just look at some people around you. They're reporters at the New York Times you can follow. They're beat reporters. Maggie Haberman. I know many people here don't know that name, but she works at the New York Times and she covers, the White House issues, Linda Greenhouse, the Supreme Court issues. So you follow somebody, you see somebody who's doing it really, really well, and you try to follow behind them. And I'm gonna throw a name out here that may be kind of unorthodox, but you look at the work ethic of, let's say, a Nick Saban, okay? And I use his name in connection about how he prepares, right? He is the best prepared coach, I think, in my lifetime. And as a journalist, you have to look at his work ethic, how he studies other offenses, how he studies other teams, and that's how you approach your subject matter. Okay, you study it the way he studies, a team's offense, a defense, and that's how you study ahead of an interview. Okay, if you're going to interview the mayor, you study. If you're going to interview the county commission president, you study. So work ethic, preparation, prepare ahead and go forward. And always, always, always don't be afraid to ask questions.
Couldn't ask for better advice there. And again, Barnett, you've been with Barnett Times, or not the Barnett Times, it should be the Barnett Times, right? The Birmingham Times since 2016 there. What are you most proud of that you've done in those 5-6 years?
I think the coverage of a lot of the people who are doing great work in this community. We have people profiles every week, and we feature one person in the community who is doing exceptional work. We recently had Dr. Jacqueline Lewis, who works at Brookwood, and she was the first Black female surgeon in the state of Alabama. First Black female surgeon in the state of Alabama, and one of the leading surgeons, and she still has office at Brookwood. I mean, it just feels so good to tell her story. And each week we tell these kinds of stories. We highlight the best of Birmingham. So I'm very, very proud of that.
As you should be. Now, give me one thing that you wish that maybe you have done better or that you're looking to improve in the future. I know that there's a lot coming from Birmingham Times. What are you most excited to do? What do you think you need to do the most?
I think we can probably drill down on more of these boards and agencies, Ivana. So we cover City Hall, okay. We're at the county commission, but I think we really need to look at the transit agency. And I'm not trying to say look for corruption or look for things that are going wrong, but just highlight what's happening over at Max Transit because transit is very very important to our community. Okay, so we need to probably ramp that up a little bit. Birmingham Waterworks board. I think water affects all of us, right? The quality of water, the board appointments. So those are two areas offhand. The water board, transit agency, and then the personnel board is an area that they have a huge impact on this community about who works for us. So I would just like to focus on those three areas.
Something I think that, and I think you'll understand my question here, but sometimes there are issues that people believe affect a group of white people, affect a group of black people or Asian people, etc. There are also, though, probably equally as many people that can look at these issues and say this is not a black and a white issue. Everybody uses water, everybody uses roads, as you said earlier. Do you think that maybe we need to step back and look at issues a little bit in less of a divisive light and a little bit more in a united light, or do you think it's important to kind of break it down?
No, I think it is to look at it, and I talked about this where I started. Look at it. We talked about this. Okay, so there are issues that have an impact on all of us that we need to coalesce around, right? And I think that's what this new group of leadership. That's what they have been doing. They've done a great job at that. They don't look at our differences. So Ivana, here's what's important for me. We're not going to always agree on everything. Okay, my wife and I have been married nearly 30 years, and we don't agree on everything, but we're still married, right? So you take those issues that you have in common, okay, and work toward those. Okay, my wife and I can put aside our differences for our two children, right? Because they what we need to do for them is to make sure they have what they need. So we can't look at what we disagree with, okay, or disagree on to get in the way of what they need. And I think that's what's happening in this community. What you see now with this regional cooperation is you have a group of leaders who are looking at those things that they have in common, okay, and then working out from there. And there are times that you just mentioned where there's some issues that may be specific to the African American community, and we talked about COVID, right? The COVID, the coronavirus hit the black community in a lot of areas harder than it did the white community. And what we have to do there is we have to go to the doctors. What should African Americans do? How can they address some of these concerns when they're not when they're not having the same outcomes as others? And one of the things what we found was, African Americans need to be more preventive, right? Have preventive care. Okay, go to the doctor before you start feeling bad. You know, so we try to have that kind of advice when we see something that's having a detrimental impact on the black community. And here's another one we have to talk about it. Crime, right? We have to put out those kinds of stories, that talk about, okay, some of the root causes of crime in the African American community. We talk to neighbors, okay? What advice would you give Birmingham police about crime? How would you stem crime? Okay, you live in these communities. You're on the ground. What advice would you provide? So crime, unfortunately, is something that's plaguing the black community and cannot be ignored.
You know, Barnett, we've talked about it being Black History Month. We've talked about Birmingham Times and your coverage all of throughout the year and also in February of Black stories and profiles and doing good in the community, no matter what color you are. So if you had to give people, you think about two kids in schools learning about Black history, or just people who are trying to learn a little bit more about Black history, maybe they don't know enough about or very much about during this month, what would you tell them to do? What would you want them to learn, or how would you tell them to get more involved or more knowledgeable?
Well, we have access to more information now than we've ever had before in our lives, right? A simple, Google search for some information. But here's to your point. You have to be careful where you get your information from. Um, Stanford University has a awesome collection of Dr. Martin Luther King's work. Um, that's a very verifiable source where you can get information from. There's another site, blackpast.org, which has a lot of wonderful information that you can that you can study on and research. The Schomburg Institute in Harlem. Okay, so these are areas that has a wealth of information, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Birmingham Times, because if you look at local news, local happenings, things that are going on, those individuals, those people profiles I just talked about, we have them up every week.
And if you're in Birmingham or Central Alabama, you can literally just go outside, go downtown, learn about things. You can't go a block without seeing a marker or something that gives you probably a little bit more information than you had before.
Right, and so we have the National Monument downtown now. The That's something very few cities have. So you have the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. You have the Masonic Temple. You have the 16th Street Baptist Church. So you have Kelly Young Park. So that entire area now has been, and they're renovating the A.G. Gaston Motel. So that entire area right now, you're absolutely right, Ivana. That's history right there in front of you. They're markers. You can do a walk along some of the trails. You can retrace the trails from the civil rights marches, which is kind of, it makes it just gives you goosebumps, right? Because you're saying, okay, all these children in 1963 during the Crusades, okay, walked along these paths. Okay, I can do the same, and sometimes it's almost like you could just hear, some of the voices, as they walk, as they march. So yeah, Birmingham's civil rights history, as much as we do to promote it, is sometimes overlooked.
Absolutely. I mean, I know I had never even been to the AG Gaston Motel until maybe last year when they announced the renovations. And I went down to check it out and get some coverage just for my job and for AL.com. And I had never really understood what it was or gone and seen it. So it's just things like that that maybe we overlook. And
Mhm.
our office was what, 2 blocks away, right? And
Yeah.
had not actually been down there and immersed myself in that. And that was something really interesting and more people should do. So Barnett, tell everybody how they can get their hands on the Birmingham Times or where they can read all of your great coverage.
Well, thank you. Well, our site is www.birminghamtimes.com. And on that, there's a tab with locations where you can pick up copies of the paper. I mean, they're found mostly downtown. I think I heard our publisher say that we're up to 225 locations now. There are places in Homewood. I went to a Publix there, and I saw a Birmingham Times displayed there. I already had one in my car, but I just bought one, just to say I got another Birmingham Times that was sitting there. I couldn't resist. So their locations, okay, on our website, and also the best place to start is our website, which I just said, birminghamtimes.com.
And we'll leave that here in the comments too, so anybody can just click through and get there. Barnett, I know they won't regret it, whether they pick it up or read it online. So Barnett, thank you so much for coming today, giving us a little bit of a lesson here and a little bit of some words to follow, some places to read, and some things to catch up on. So Barnett, thank you as always.
And it's always great talking to you. I enjoyed the conversation, Ivana.
Thanks, Barnett. Everybody watching, thank you. Have a safe weekend. We'll see you on Monday.